The stone walls still stand today 3 miles north of what became Thornfield, Montana. They have not shifted 1 inch in 141 years. The roof has been replaced 4 times, but the stones remain warm to the touch even on the coldest winter afternoons when the wind cuts down from the Rockies and the thermometer drops below zero. I am 78 years old now, sitting in my own house in Thornfield, and I am about to tell you the story my mother told me to remember when I was 5 years old in 1949. She was 76 then, sitting in that very shelter she had built with her own hands, and she made me promise to keep every word alive. I have kept that promise. My mother was Constance Warren, though everyone called her Connie. She built those stone walls in the spring and summer of 1883 when I was 10 years old. What follows is the story as it happened, told through my eyes as a boy who learned that courage and knowledge can change the world, even when the world insists you are wrong. Let me tell you about the winter when I learned that evidence matters more than comfort, and that the difference between survival and death is often nothing more than the willingness to try something different. 14 logs. That was all we burned during the blizzard that lasted 3.5 days in November of 1883. Our neighbors burned 140. They nearly froze. We stayed comfortable at 67 degrees while the wind screamed outside at 40 below zero, and the snow buried everything 3 feet deep. People thought my mother had lost her mind when she announced in April that we would build with stone instead of wood. They said stone was cold. They said we would die. They tried to take my sister Beatrice and me away from her because they believed she was unfit to raise children. But when that blizzard came and went, and we emerged warm and safe while others suffered frostbite, and worse, everything changed. The knowledge my grandfather brought from Cornwall spread across Montana territory and beyond, and children who would have frozen to death in timber cabins lived because one widow and her 10-year-old son had the courage to trust science over tradition. Stone has memory, my mother told me that spring as we hauled rocks from the hillside. Wood burns fast and forgets. Stone absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. It is patient. It does not fight the cold. It simply remembers the warmth and gives it back when you need it most. How many lives has a principle saved when the people brave enough to prove it are willing to stand alone? I was 10 that April when everything changed. I remember standing beside my mother in front of our rotting log cabin, watching her stare at the sagging walls like she was looking at an open grave. In a way she was. My father had died 2 winters before hauling freight across the Missouri when his wagon broke through river ice in January of 1881. They brought him back to us, frozen solid. Mother did not cry. She sat by the fire for 3 days without speaking, without eating, just staring at the flames, like they held answers to questions she had not yet learned to ask. That first winter without him taught me what cold really means. Not discomfort, not inconvenience. Cold is a predator, and we were prey. I learned to split wood that year. My hands were too small for the axe, and they blistered and bled and eventually grew calluses that made them look like they belonged to someone 3 times my age. Mother woke every 2 hours through the night to feed the fire because if she let it die, we would freeze. I got pneumonia in February, coughed until I vomited blood. The doctor told Mother I might not make it, and he was not being dramatic. He was being honest, but I survived barely. The second winter brought new horrors. We ran out of wood in mid-February, and what followed I try not to remember in detail. Furniture burned for fuel. Beatrice crying tears that would not stop. The doctor's grim face when he said we might not survive another season like this. Those months taught me that suffering is not noble. It is simply suffering, and it serves no purpose except to kill you if you let it. When spring finally came in 1883, I did not feel relief. I felt dread because I knew another winter was coming, and I did not think we would live through a third one. Mother stood looking at the sandstone hillside behind our homestead for a long time that April morning. Layers of rock jutted from the earth like broken teeth exposed by the snowmelt. She turned to me, and her voice was steady. "We are going to build a new home, Silas, not wood, stone." I stared at her. Everyone knew stone was cold. Father had said so before he died. The neighbors said so. Even the teacher at school talked about how wood breathed and kept you warm. But Mother Stone is cold. Everyone builds with wood. She knelt so her eyes were level with mine. Her face was thin from 2 hard winters, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Do you trust your father, or do you trust me? I hesitated. Father was dead. Mother was alive. But father had been a man, and men were supposed to know things. I do not know. Then trust the last winter. Did wood save us? No. Then we will try something different. I was afraid she was wrong, afraid the neighbors would mock us, afraid we would die because of this decision. But I was more afraid of another winter like the last one. So I nodded. All right, Mother, I will help you. She smiled then just a little, and I saw something in her face I had not seen in 2 years. Hope. We started gathering stones the next day. Mother taught me how to choose them. Not every stone would work. Sandstone from the ridge was soft enough to shape but strong enough to hold weight. River rocks were good for foundations because they were smooth and stable. Limestone could withstand high heat, so we would use it for the firebox. How do you know all this? I asked. Your grandfather taught me. He was a stonemason from Cornwall. He built root cellars in Colorado that stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. He understood stone better than anyone I have ever known. But how does stone keep you warm? Stone has memory, Silas. It remembers heat. We spent all of May hauling stones. Mother tore apart the old cabin and used the lumber to build a sled. We loaded it with rocks and dragged it across uneven ground from the hillside to a flat area at the base of the hill. The work was exhausting. My hands, which had just healed from winter's woodcutting, blistered again. After the first day, I could barely close my fingers. That night I wanted to quit, but Mother looked at me across our small fire. Winter will not wait for soft hands. If you want to survive, you have to be harder than the cold. So I kept working, and my hands grew harder. By mid-May, we had a pile of stones taller than I was. That was when Josiah Blackwell rode past one afternoon and stopped his horse when he saw us loading stones. What are you doing, Mrs. Warren, building a home? Josiah laughed. With stone you will freeze to death in that thing. Stone is colder than wood, everyone knows that. Mother straightened and wiped sweat from her forehead. We will see Mr. Blackwell. Josiah shook his head like he was watching a child do something foolish. He glanced at me, and I saw pity in his eyes. It made my stomach twist with shame. He turned his horse and rode away, but I heard him talking to his ranch foreman as they left. Poor widow has lost her mind. That boy is going to suffer for her stubbornness. I bit down hard on my anger and stared at the ground. I wanted to defend Mother, but I did not know how. I did not even know if she was right. That night I asked her, what if Mr. Blackwell is right? What if we freeze? She was sitting by the fire holding an old leather journal wrapped in oilcloth. She opened it carefully and motioned for me to sit beside her. Read this. The handwriting was neat and precise. My grandfather Matthias Sterling had written in careful block letters, Stone Shelters. Cornish design built in the hills for 1,000 years. Thick walls 2 feet at the base, low ceilings, 7 feet at the peak, earth bermed on 3 sides, small openings for light. These will outlast wood 10 to 1 and keep a family warm with 1/10 of the fuel. I looked up at Mother. Grandfather built these in Colorado. When I was 15, we had a cold snap that lasted a week. Temperature dropped to 30 below zero. Our neighbors burned 100 logs. We used 12. I saw it with my own eyes. Stoneworks. Then why did Father not believe you? She was quiet for a long moment. Your father was a good man, but he was afraid of being different. He thought safety came from doing what everyone else did, and maybe he was right in his own way. But he is gone now, and I will not let fear kill you and Beatrice the way it killed him. I looked back down at the journal. There were detailed drawings, measurements, notes on mortar ratios and thermal mass and ventilation. This was not guesswork. This was knowledge. I will help you, Mother, and I will learn everything Grandfather knew. She put her hand on my shoulder. Then we start tomorrow. June was a month of hard lessons. Mother taught me to mix mortar. 3 parts clay to 1 part sand with just enough water to make it hold without being runny. I got it wrong the first time. Too thin. The mortar ran off the stones like soup. Do it again. Weak mortar means weak walls, and weak walls mean death. I did it again. 5 times before I got it right. But once I understood the texture, the feel of it in my hands, I never forgot. She taught me to use the plumb line, a weighted string Grandfather had made from braided hemp, and a small lead weight. The walls had to be perfectly vertical. Even a 1-inch lean at the bottom would become 6 inches at the top, and the wall would collapse under its own weight. I checked every row of stones with that plumb line. I became obsessed with precision because I learned that in building there is no such thing as close enough. Either it is right or it will fail. We dug into the hillside for the north wall 3 feet deep into the earth. Why so deep? Earth is insulation. 3 feet of earth is as effective as 50 logs of wood. The ground keeps the cold out and the heat in. I dug with a shovel too big for my hands, moving soil 1 scoop at a time. It was slow, back-breaking work, but I felt something growing inside me with every shovelful. Strength, not just in my body but in my mind. This was work that mattered, and I was doing it. By the end of June, the walls were rising. We worked from dawn until dusk, laying stone after stone, mixing mortar, checking the plumb line, adjusting and refining. My hands were covered in calluses. My back ached every night, but I could see progress. I could see something real taking shape. That was when Cyrus Hartley came to visit. He was a carpenter, 38 years old, the best in Judith Basin. He built cabins that were tight and square and beautiful. When he showed up at our construction site in early July, I knew he had come to tell us we were doing it wrong. "Mrs. Warren, I have been hearing talk in town. People are worried about you and the children. We are fine, Mr. Hartley. Thank you for your concern." Cyrus walked around the foundation we had laid. He examined the stones, the mortar, the way we had dug into the hillside. He pulled out a small notebook and sketched a quick diagram. Then he shook his head. "Stone sweats. Moisture builds up. You will get mold, maybe worse. Wood breathes. It lets moisture out. This will trap it inside." Mother listened patiently. "I appreciate your concern, but we will be fine." Cyrus turned to me. "Son, do you understand what your mother is doing?" I looked up at him. He was not being cruel. He genuinely seemed worried. "Yes, sir. She is building a stone shelter using my grandfather's design. It will keep us warmer than wood and use less fuel." Cyrus sighed. "That is what she told you. But son, I have been building for 20 years. I know what works and what does not. Let me build you a proper cabin. I will give you a fair price and you can pay over 2 years. Mother stepped between us. "I appreciate the offer, but we will do this ourselves." Cyrus looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Stubbornness will not keep your children warm, Mrs. Warren." He left, and that night I could not sleep. I lay in the loft of the old cabin staring at the ceiling, and for the first time I let real doubt creep in. What if Mother was wrong? What if Cyrus Hartley, with his 20 years of experience, knew better than a widow following the notes of a dead stonemason? I climbed down from the loft and found Mother sitting by the fire. She was holding the journal again, and I could see her eyes were red. "Silas, you should be asleep." "Mother, are you sure about this?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. "No, Silas, I am not sure. I am terrified. What if I am wrong? What if I kill you and Beatrice because I was too stubborn to listen? Then why are we doing it? Because I am more afraid of doing nothing. Your father died because he would not try something new. He died hauling freight in dangerous cold because we needed money for firewood. I will not let that happen again. I would rather fail trying something I believe in than succeed at barely surviving." She opened the journal and showed me a passage I had not seen before. The ink was faded but still legible. "My dearest Mary, I have drawn plans for a winter shelter. Cornish design meant for mountains. If we ever settle in cold country, this will keep us warm when wood fails. Trust the stone. It will not betray you." I read it twice. Grandfather knew this would work. He did. And I saw it work. And now I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I thought about Father frozen in his wagon. I thought about the winters of cold and fear. I thought about Beatrice crying because she could not get warm. "Yes, Mother, I trust you." She pulled me close and held me tight. "Then we will build it together and we will prove them all wrong." July brought the walls up in earnest. We worked in a rhythm now. Mother would lay the stones and I would mix the mortar and hand it to her. We would check the plumb line together. We would adjust and refine. The walls grew thicker at the base, 24 inches, then tapered to 18 inches at the top. Every stone was chosen carefully. Every joint was filled completely. I started to understand something Mother had not put into words. Building was not just about stacking materials. It was about understanding how forces worked, how weight distributed, how heat moved, how air flowed. When we built the firebox, she taught me to choose dense river stones that would not crack under high heat. We angled them inward to reflect heat back into the room instead of letting it escape up the chimney. The chimney itself was short, just tall enough to create a draft without pulling all the warm air out of the shelter. Why short, long chimneys pull heat out? Short chimneys keep heat in. Your grandfather learned that from blacksmiths in Cornwall. Everything had a reason. Nothing was arbitrary. And I was learning to see the world the way grandfather had seen it, as a system, as something that could be understood and controlled if you had the knowledge. Then on July 24th, disaster struck. I went to the old cabin to retrieve grandfather's journal where Mother kept it wrapped in oilcloth under her bedroll. The wrapping was there. The journal was gone. Mother's face went pale when I told her. We searched everywhere, under floorboards, in the corners, through every piece of remaining furniture. Nothing. Where is it, I do not know. Maybe it fell out when we were moving things. We spent 2 hours searching the area between the old cabin and the new shelter. We found nothing. Mother sat down on a pile of stones and put her face in her hands. Without that journal, we do not have the specifications for the firebox angle. I was going by memory, but I wanted to check the measurements. What if I built it wrong? I sat beside her. "You have been checking it every day. It looks exactly like the drawings you showed me. But what if I remembered wrong?" "We will make it work. We have to." She looked at me and I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not the kind you can talk yourself out of. The kind that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Then we had better hope my memory is as good as I think it is. We finished the roof by July 28th. Overlapping logs covered with clay, and then a thick layer of sod. The ceiling inside was only 7 feet at its highest point. It felt low cramped. Why not higher heat rises? Low ceiling means less space to heat, which means less fuel needed. We are not building for beauty. We are building for survival. On July 28th we finished. I stood outside and looked at what we had built. It did not look like the cabins in town. It looked like a mound of earth with a chimney sticking out of it. It looked strange, almost ugly, but I felt a fierce pride looking at it because I had built it with my own hands. Beatrice came running up, her eyes wide. "It looks like a castle for hobbits." I tried to stay serious, but I could not help smiling. "It is not a castle. It is a shelter that will keep us alive." That afternoon, Josiah Blackwell rode past again. He stopped and stared at our finished structure. "Looks like a root cellar someone gave up on. Poor woman has built her own grave." I felt my fist clench. I wanted to run out and tell him he was wrong, that we had built something better than his ranch house that he would see when winter came. But Mother put a hand on my shoulder. "Words are cheap. Results are expensive. Let winter do the talking." So I stayed silent. But I marked that moment in my memory. I would remember Josiah Blackwell's mockery. And I would remember the day he realized he was wrong. On August 1st, we moved into the stone shelter. The interior was small, 16 feet by 20, but every inch had a purpose. There were built-in shelves carved into the stone for food storage, a sleeping loft for Beatrice and me, a small area near the firebox where Mother would sleep. The floor was packed earth covered with woven grass mats. That first night felt strange. The stone walls made everything quiet. Outside, sounds were muffled. The space felt tight, enclosed, like being inside a cave. I did not sleep well. I missed the familiar creaks of the old cabin. But the next morning I woke to something I had not experienced in years. Warmth. Mother had lit a small fire before dawn, just 3 logs, and let it burn down. By the time Beatrice and I woke, the fire was almost out, just glowing embers. But the room was warm. Not hot, not cold, just perfectly evenly warm. I pressed my hand against the stones. They were warm too. Not on the surface, but deep inside, like the stone itself was alive and breathing heat. "Mother, how is this possible?" She smiled. "The stone absorbed heat all night. Now it is giving it back. Slowly, patiently. This is what your grandfather understood. Stone does not fight the cold. It just remembers the warmth." 3 weeks later, in mid-August, we got our first real test. A heat wave struck Montana territory. Temperatures climbed to 95, then 100 degrees. It lasted 10 days. In town, people sweltered. I heard later that Josiah's ranch house was unbearable, that his family slept outside because it was cooler under the stars than inside their timber walls. But inside our stone shelter it stayed between 68 and 72 degrees. Cool, comfortable, almost magical. I ran my hand along the wall on the hottest day. "It is cool." Mother nodded. "Stone absorbs heat during the day, keeps the inside cool. At night, when it cools down outside, the stone releases that heat slowly. It works both ways, summer and winter." I was stunned. This was not just a winter shelter. This was a year-round climate control system built from nothing but stone and knowledge. That was when I truly began to believe. Late August brought our first visitor who understood what we had done. Amos Fletcher appeared one afternoon without warning. He was 65 years old, a retired surveyor who had worked across the Western Territories. He rode up on a calm gray mare dismounted with the careful movements of an older man and approached our shelter with obvious curiosity. Mother was cautious, but invited him inside. Amos walked slowly around the interior. He examined the stonework closely. He looked at the firebox. He studied the plumb line still hanging from a peg. He checked the way we had dug into the hillside. He said nothing for a long time. Finally he turned to Mother. "Your father was from Cornwall, was he not?" Mother's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Because I worked in Welsh quarries for 15 years. I know Cornish stonework when I see it. And I know what this is. A winter shelter. They built these in the mountains for centuries. You understand?" Amos nodded. "I do. And I think you are going to prove a lot of people wrong come winter. But be prepared. They will not like being wrong." He left, but came back 3 days later with old journals from his time in Wales. He sat with Mother and me for hours, showing us sketches, explaining techniques, sharing stories of stone cottages that stood for 500 years. "You have built well, but I can show you how to make it even better." Over the next 2 weeks, Amos became our teacher. Mother and I adjusted the firebox stones, angling them more precisely. We made small vents near the floor to allow air circulation without losing heat. We refined what was already good into something exceptional. By September, as the first cool nights began, we were ready. We tested the system carefully. 3 logs at night. By morning, the shelter stayed at 65 degrees even after the fire had died to embers. I recorded everything in a notebook Amos gave me. Fuel consumption, temperature readings, time between fires. The numbers were remarkable. We were using less than a third of the wood the old cabin required for the same warmth. On September 20th, Josiah rode past while I was stacking our winter wood supply. He stopped and counted the logs I had piled. "That is not nearly enough for a winter boy." I looked up at him. Something had changed in me over the summer. I was not afraid anymore. "It is enough for us." He laughed. "Your mother has filled your head with nonsense. You will be begging at my door by December." I stood up straight and looked him in the eye. "Mr. Blackwell, my mother knows what she is doing. I helped build this shelter. Every stone. I know exactly how it works. Do you—" He stared at me, surprised that a boy would speak to him that way. The surprise turned to irritation. "You will learn, boy. Winter does not care about your stubbornness." He rode off and I went back to stacking wood. But I felt different. For the first time I had stood up for Mother, not with fists, but with confidence, with knowledge. That night I told her about the conversation. She looked at me with something like pride. "You are growing up, not just bigger, wiser. I learned it from you." "No, you learned it from doing, from building, from seeing evidence with your own eyes. That is the best kind of learning." September 30th brought a crisis that could have destroyed us. The church board held an emergency meeting. Mother was not invited, but the entire settlement knew what was happening. Cyrus and Abigail Hartley had formally petitioned to have Beatrice and me removed from Mother's care. Their concern, they claimed, was genuine. The shelter was untested. Winter was coming. Children's lives were at stake. Amos attended that meeting and sent word to us afterward about what transpired. The debate was fierce. Josiah Blackwell spoke against us, citing Mother's stubbornness and what he called reckless endangerment. Temperance Winthrop, the schoolteacher, read from her letter describing unconventional and potentially dangerous living conditions. Nearly a dozen voices rose in agreement. But then Cyrus Hartley stood, the man who had warned Mother against stone, who had offered to build her a proper cabin, who had every reason to condemn her choice. "I have measured her structure. I have examined her methods, and I have found them sound. Not familiar, but sound. I was wrong to doubt her. I ask that you have the humility to admit you might be wrong as well." The room erupted. Accusations flew. Some called Cyrus a fool. Others demanded immediate action. Then Amos Fletcher rose and placed his thermometer readings on the table. Numbers. Evidence. The church board went silent. Mrs. Warren's shelter maintained 67 degrees on minimal fuel. My cabin, built by the best carpenter in the territory, maintains 58 degrees with 3 times the wood consumption. These are facts, not opinions. I propose we let winter be the judge. The vote was called. 7 hands rose to intervene immediately. 5 hands rose to wait. We had won by 2 votes, 2 voices standing between us and separation. When Mother heard the news, I saw her hands shake for the first time since Father's death. "They almost took you from me, but they did not. And they will not, because we are going to prove them all wrong." Early October brought the first snow. Just 4 inches, but it came earlier than usual, and it signaled that winter was not far behind. I woke on October 10th to white covering the ground. Mother was already up building a small fire. 2 logs. We watched the flames catch. We monitored the temperature. By noon, the shelter was 67 degrees. The fire had burned down to coals. Outside, it was 25 degrees and windy. I checked the north wall temperature with my palm. It was warmer than the interior air. "The earth is keeping us warm, too." Mother nodded. 3 feet of soil is insulation. The ground temperature below the frost line stays at about 50 degrees year-round. That warmth radiates through the stone. I was beginning to understand the full genius of the design. It was not just about the stone. It was about working with every natural advantage. Earth, thermal mass, gravity, airflow. Everything was part of the system. For the next month we tested and refined. I kept detailed logs. October 15th, 3 logs, 66 degrees. October 20th, 4 logs on a particularly cold night, 68 degrees. October 25th, 2 logs, 64 degrees. We were averaging 3.5 logs per day. The old cabin had required 10 to 12. On the morning of October 23rd, I was rearranging supplies in the corner where we kept Grandfather's tools when something caught my eye. A flash of brown leather wedged between 2 foundation stones near the base of the wall. I reached down and my fingers closed around familiar oilcloth. The journal. It must have fallen during construction when we were moving materials back and forth. It had slipped into a gap and we had mortared over it without noticing. I pulled it free carefully. The leather was undamaged. The pages inside were dry and intact. Mother's relief when I showed her was physical. She sat down heavily on our bench and pressed the journal to her chest. I thought I had remembered wrong. I thought maybe the firebox angle was off and we would not know until winter tested us. But you built it perfectly. She opened the journal and checked Grandfather's diagram against what we had constructed. The measurements matched exactly. Her memory had been flawless, but now we know for certain. That afternoon an old woman appeared at our door without warning. I had seen her once before in town, a figure people whispered about but rarely approached. Edith Grimwood was 70 years old. Shoshone on her mother's side, living alone in a cabin 5 miles north. She wore layers of wool and leather, and her eyes were sharp as broken glass. Mother invited her in cautiously. Edith walked the perimeter of the shelter without speaking. She ran her hands over the stones. She examined the firebox. She studied the way we had integrated the earthworks. Finally she spoke. "The stone speaks truth, but winter will test more than walls." Mother met her gaze. "We are prepared." Edith reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a stone the size of my fist. It was dark gray, almost black, with thin veins of white running through it. She held it out to me. "From the sacred mountain. My grandmother's grandmother knew this stone. It holds fire better than any other. Place it at the heart." I took it. The stone was heavy dense. "What do I do with it?" "Build it into your firebox. Center position where the heat concentrates. It will remember longer than the others." Mother watched this exchange with careful attention. "Why are you helping us?" "Because knowledge that dies serves no one. Your grandfather's people understood stone from across the ocean. My people understood stone from this ground. Same truth, different teachers." Edith left as quietly as she had come. Mother and I looked at the stone in my hands. The next day we carefully removed one of the firebox stones and fitted Edith's gift into its place. The stone settled perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this exact position. On November 1st, Amos Fletcher came to visit with his barometer. The pressure was dropping rapidly. Big storm coming, bigger than anything in a decade, when maybe 2 weeks. Get everything ready. Mother and I went into preparation mode. We checked our wood supply. 65 logs remaining, plus what we would gather in the next 2 weeks. We sealed every small gap. We stockpiled water in case the well froze. We organized our food supplies. I felt nervous but not afraid. We had prepared. We had evidence that our shelter worked. Now we just had to trust it. During the second week of November, a young man started appearing at odd hours. Nathaniel Blackwell was 16 years old, Josiah's eldest son. He would arrive after dark and leave before dawn. He never stayed long. Just watched Mother work, asked quiet questions about mortar and thermal mass and heat retention. "His father does not know you are here." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "My father thinks he knows everything about everything. But I watched your shelter stay cool in August when our house was unbearable. I want to understand how." So Mother taught him. Not everything, just enough. The basics of what made stone work. Nathaniel absorbed it all with the hunger of someone who had spent his whole life being told there was only one way to do things. On November 17th, the temperature began to drop sharply. 10 degrees, then 5, then 0. Amos came by that afternoon. "Tomorrow. Maybe tonight. Get inside and stay inside." That evening, Josiah Blackwell rode up one last time. His expression was serious. No mockery now, just genuine concern. "Mrs. Warren, I am offering one last time. Bring your children to my ranch. This storm will be deadly." I stepped outside before Mother could answer. "Mr. Blackwell, we are staying." He looked at me and I saw something in his face change. Not mockery this time, something closer to respect or maybe just recognition that I had made a choice. "Boy, this is not a game. People will die in this storm. Then we will be among the ones who live, because we have prepared, because we understand what we built, because we trust knowledge over fear." Josiah stared at me for a long moment. "You are either the bravest boy I have ever met, or the most foolish. Time will tell." He rode away into the gathering dusk. I watched him go, then turned to see Mother standing in the doorway. "Are you scared?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes. But I am more scared of not trying." "Then we are ready." We went inside. Mother closed the heavy door and latched it. She built a small fire. 2 logs. Beatrice played with her dolls near the warmth. I sat and opened my notebook ready to record everything that would happen in the next few days. Outside, the wind began to rise. The wind hit at 4 in the morning on November 18th, and it hit like a fist. I woke to the sound of it screaming across the hillside, a noise so loud and violent it seemed impossible that mere air could make such a sound. For a moment, lying in the loft beside Beatrice, I forgot where I was. The darkness was absolute. The roar outside was constant. I felt a spike of pure terror shoot through my chest. Then I remembered. Stone walls 2 feet thick built into the earth. We were safe. I climbed down from the loft as quietly as I could, but Mother was already awake. She was kneeling by the firebox, adding 2 logs to the embers from the night before. The firelight cast her shadow huge against the stone wall. Could not sleep. It will get louder. But we will be fine. She spoke with such certainty that I believed her. I sat down near the fire and watched the flames catch. Outside, the wind intensified. I could hear it now, not just as sound, but as force pressing against the shelter, testing it, looking for weakness. There was none to find. By 6 o'clock, Beatrice was awake, and Mother made breakfast over the fire. Cornmeal mush with a bit of dried apple. We ate in the warmth, and I kept glancing at the door, wondering what it looked like outside. Do not even think about opening that door until this is over. How long will it last? Amos said 3 days, maybe 4. I did my mental arithmetic. We had used 2 logs overnight. If we used 4 per day for 4 days, that would be 16 logs total. We had 78 in reserve after our gathering. We would be fine. But I wanted to be sure. So I pulled out my notebook and began recording. November 18th, 6 o'clock in the morning. 2 logs burned overnight. Fire rebuilt with 2 more. Temperature inside 65 degrees. Wind outside estimated at 50 to 60 miles per hour based on sound. Visibility through Windows 0 whiteout conditions. Mother watched me write and smiled. Your grandfather would be proud of you. Why? Because you do not just trust, you verify. That is the mark of a real builder. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. By 8 in the morning, the storm was at full strength. The wind had become a constant roar, and snow was falling so thick that when I looked out the small south window, I could not see 5 feet beyond the glass. The world had vanished into white chaos, but inside life continued normally. Mother worked on mending clothes. Beatrice played with her dolls, making up elaborate stories. I read from one of our 3 books, though I found myself reading the same page over and over because my mind kept wandering to what was happening outside. At 10 o'clock, I checked the temperature, 67 degrees. The fire had burned down to a steady bed of coals radiating heat that the stones absorbed and held. I pressed my palm flat against the north wall. It was warm. Not hot, but warm enough that I could feel it through my palm. The afternoon dragged. There was nothing to do but wait. I tried to read. I tried to help Mother with small tasks. I tried to play with Beatrice, but my mind kept circling back to the same questions. What if the storm got worse? What if something we had not anticipated went wrong? At 2 in the afternoon, I added another log to the fire without being asked. Mother watched but said nothing. I was learning to manage the heat myself, to understand when fuel was needed and when the thermal mass could carry us. 3 logs so far today. We were on track. By 4 in the afternoon, the light outside was beginning to fade, though it was hard to tell because the whiteout made everything gray anyway. The wind had not decreased. If anything, it seemed to have found a second gear, a deeper, more sustained howl. I checked the temperature again. 66 degrees. Steady, reliable. The stone was doing exactly what Grandfather had promised it would do. It was remembering heat and giving it back slowly, patiently, without drama or complaint. That evening we heard it. A sound that made my blood freeze. Distant, muffled by the wind, but distinct. A cracking, splintering sound like a giant tree breaking. Mother went to the window and peered out into the white chaos. Timber. Something collapsed. A cabin maybe, or a barn. Hard to tell from here. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Someone out there was in trouble. Real trouble. We have to help them. Mother turned to look at me. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "Silas, we cannot go out there. It is 30 below with 60-mile-per-hour winds. We would die in minutes. But what if someone needs help? Then they will have to wait until the storm passes. I will not risk you and Beatrice to save someone who chose to ignore good advice." Her words were harsh, but I understood the logic. We could not help anyone if we froze to death trying. Still, I felt uneasy. Someone was suffering out there, maybe dying, and we were warm and safe. It did not seem fair. But life, I was learning, was not fair. It was just physics. Cold moved toward heat. Wind followed pressure gradients. Wood burned and stone remembered. These were facts indifferent to human suffering or virtue. The storm did not care who deserved to survive. It only cared who had prepared. That night, Mother added 2 logs to the fire before bed. The routine was becoming automatic. 2 logs overnight, 2 to 4 during the day, depending on outside temperature. Simple, sustainable, effective. I climbed into the loft beside Beatrice, who was already asleep. I lay in the darkness, listening to the wind, and I thought about the sound we had heard that afternoon. I wondered whose roof had collapsed, whose cabin had failed, whether they had survived. And I wondered if, when this was over, they would finally listen. I woke once in the night, some deep instinct pulling me from sleep. The fire had burned down to embers, just a faint red glow in the darkness. I held my breath and listened. The wind was still raging, but inside the shelter I could not feel it. The walls blocked everything. The cold, the sound, the chaos. We were in our own small world, protected by 2 feet of stone and the knowledge of a dead stonemason from Cornwall. I pressed my hand against the stone beside the loft. It was still warm. Hours after the fire had died down, the stone was still giving back heat. I smiled in the darkness and went back to sleep. Morning came gray and violent. November 19th, day 2. I climbed down from the loft to find Mother already awake, sitting by the fire with her journal open. She was writing, her handwriting small and precise in the dim light. "What are you writing?" "Everything. Temperatures, wood consumption, how the shelter performs. If this works, other people will need to know how to do it. You think they will listen now?" After this storm, she looked up at me. "If we survive comfortably while they suffer, they will have to listen. Evidence is hard to ignore." I sat beside her and opened my own notebook. November 19th, 6 o'clock in the morning. Fire burned to embers overnight. Temperature 62 degrees. Outside temperature estimated at -15 based on the sound of the wind and the ice forming on the inside of the window glass. 2 logs used overnight. I added 2 more logs to rebuild the fire. The wood caught quickly on the hot embers, and within minutes fresh heat was radiating outward. Beatrice woke and came down from the loft, rubbing her eyes. "Is it still snowing?" I looked out the window. I could see maybe 3 feet now instead of 0, but that was only because the wind had shifted slightly. The snow was still falling in thick, heavy curtains. "Yes, Bea, still snowing." She shrugged and went to play with her dolls. The storm meant nothing to her. She was warm. She was fed. She was safe. That was enough. The morning passed slowly. I read. I helped Mother prepare food. I played a counting game with Beatrice. And every hour I checked the temperature and recorded it in my notebook. 7 in the morning, 64 degrees. 8 in the morning, 66 degrees. 9 in the morning, 67 degrees. Then at 10 o'clock, disaster struck. Mother stood to retrieve water from our storage barrel near the door. Her foot caught on the edge of a grass mat. She pitched forward and tried to catch herself on the stone shelf. I heard the crack before I understood what had happened. Mother gasped and crumpled to the floor, cradling her left arm. Her face had gone white. The angle of her forearm was wrong, bent where it should have been straight. Beatrice started crying. I dropped to my knees beside Mother. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly terrifyingly clear. I had watched the doctor set a broken bone once when a neighbor fell from a wagon. Mother had made me pay attention. "Learn this," she had said. "You never know when you will need it. I need you to be very brave right now." Mother's voice was tight with pain but steady. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to set your arm." like Dr. Patterson showed me. Her eyes widened. Silas, you are 10 years old, and you taught me to learn by doing. I can do this, but I need you to trust me. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Do it. I made Beatrice bring me strips of cloth and 2 straight pieces of wood from our kindling pile. I had Mother sit with her back against the wall. This is going to hurt. I know. I gripped her forearm above and below the break. I took a deep breath. Then I pulled and twisted in one smooth motion the way I had seen the doctor do. Mother's scream filled the small space. Beatrice sobbed, but the bone shifted back into alignment with a sound that made my stomach turn. I wrapped the arm quickly, splinting it with the wood and binding it tight with cloth. My hands were steady, even though my heart was racing. When I finished, I sat back and looked at Mother. Her face was pale and covered in sweat, but the terrible angle was gone. The arm was straight. You did well. Her voice was barely a whisper. I had no choice. Yes, you did. You could have panicked. You could have frozen. But you remembered and you acted. Your grandfather would have been proud of that too. I helped her to her sleeping area and made her as comfortable as I could. Then I realized what had just happened. Mother could not manage the fire. She could not prepare food. She could not care for Beatrice. For the next however many days until the storm ended and we could get help, I was in charge. I was 10 years old, and I was now responsible for keeping my family alive. I added 1 log to the fire at noon. I kept the temperature steady. I made food for Beatrice and Mother. I checked Mother's arm every few hours to make sure the swelling was not getting worse, and I kept recording data in my notebook because that was what builders did. They measured. They verified. They did not trust. They knew. At 2 in the afternoon there was a knock on the door, so faint I almost missed it over the wind. I looked at Mother. She nodded. Be careful. I unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. A blast of cold air and snow hit my face. Standing in the doorway covered in frost was Amos Fletcher. He stumbled inside and I caught him before he fell. His face was gray. His lips were blue. Ice had formed in his beard. Mr. Fletcher, what happened? He could barely speak. The words came out in broken fragments. Roof collapsed. Had to evacuate. Thought of you. Gambled everything on finding you. I helped him to the fire. Behind him, someone else pushed through the door. A young man also covered in ice. Nathaniel Blackwell. His eyes were wild with panic. My father. Our cabin part of the roof gave way. He is trapped. He is hurt. Please. Mother tried to sit up. Silas, you have to help them. But I cannot leave you. You have to. Take Amos's knowledge. Take what I taught you about injuries. Nathaniel will show you the way. I looked at Beatrice, who was staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. I looked at Mother with her broken arm. I looked at Amos barely conscious by the fire. I looked at Nathaniel desperate and shaking. I was 10 years old and I had never felt more terrified or more certain of what I had to do. I pulled on my heaviest coat. I wrapped cloth around my face. I took a coil of rope and some clean bandages. Nathaniel and I stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow. The wind tried to tear me off my feet. I could not see more than a few feet in any direction. Nathaniel grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. We moved slowly, fighting for every step. The snow was waist-deep, the wind screamed. My face went numb almost immediately. Nathaniel's cabin was only a quarter-mile away, but it took us 20 minutes to reach it. Part of the roof had collapsed inward. Snow was pouring through the gap. Inside, Josiah Blackwell lay pinned under a timber beam. His leg was trapped. Blood soaked through his trousers. Nathaniel and I got the beam off him together. I examined the leg as best I could with frozen fingers. The bone was not broken, but there was a deep gash across his thigh. I cleaned it with snow, packed it with cloth, and bound it tight. Josiah watched me the whole time with something like wonder in his eyes. You came. In this storm you came. You would have died. After everything I said about you and your mother, you still came. Because you were wrong does not mean you should die for it. We got Josiah to his feet. Nathaniel supported him on one side and I took the other. We made it back to our shelter, moving even slower than before. By the time we got Josiah through the door, I could not feel my hands or feet. Mother wrapped me in blankets. Beatrice held me tight and cried. In the corner, Amos had recovered enough to sit up. He was staring around the shelter in amazement. 68 degrees. You are maintaining 68 degrees in the middle of this. 4 logs per day. Amos shook his head slowly. Margaret, you have not just built a shelter. You have proven a principle. There was another knock at the door near evening. This time it was Obadiah Crane, the trapper who lived north of town. He looked like he had been through hell. 2 dead. The words came out flat. Cabin collapsed on the Morrison place. William Morrison and his boy. They did not make it. The room went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Mother closed her eyes. Beatrice started crying again. Josiah put his face in his hands. Those deaths were unnecessary. Those deaths happened because people did not know any better. But they could have. Mother's voice was quiet, but it cut through the shelter like a blade. If they had listened. If they had been willing to try something different. If knowledge had mattered more than tradition. As darkness fell on the second day of the storm, our shelter held 6 people instead of 3. Amos recovering from exposure, Josiah with his injured leg, Obadiah resting before he attempted to return to his own cabin, Nathaniel who refused to leave his father, Mother with her broken arm, Beatrice frightened but safe, and me trying to manage it all. I added 2 logs to the fire. I checked the temperature. 67 degrees. I wrote in my notebook, November 19th, 6 o'clock evening, 6 people inside, 2 logs added, temperature stable. That night, as everyone settled to sleep, I noticed something strange. Edith's stone in the center of the firebox was glowing, not brightly, just a faint luminescence, a soft green-white light barely visible in the darkness. I touched it carefully. It was warm, very warm. The glow intensified slightly when the heat increased. Mother saw it too. Her eyes widened. Phosphorescent minerals. The heat activates them. Your grandfather wrote about stones like this in the Welsh mines. They would glow in the blacksmith forges. Is it magic? No. It is geology. But it gives us light. And light is what people need to see their way forward. The third day dawned quieter. The wind had dropped from a scream to a moan. Amos sat with me and helped me understand what we had proven. You maintained temperature with minimal fuel while sheltering 6 people, in conditions that killed at least 2 and injured countless others. Do you understand what this means? That stone works, that knowledge works, that evidence matters, that 1 woman and 1 boy can be right when an entire community is wrong. By evening the wind had died to a strong breeze. The snow had stopped. The sky was clearing. The storm was over. Final count. 14 logs total over 3.5 days. We had maintained an average temperature of 66 degrees. We had sheltered Amos Fletcher when his timber cabin failed him. We had saved Josiah Blackwell's life. We had provided refuge for Obadiah Crane. We had done it all with a structure that most people had called foolish. I sat by the fire that night writing in my notebook, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not just pride, not just relief, but certainty. I knew now beyond any doubt that knowledge was power, that evidence mattered, that the courage to do things differently could mean the difference between life and death. Mother sat beside me. Her arm was splinted and healing. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. How do you feel? Like we won. We did. But the real test comes next. What do you mean? She looked toward the door, toward the world outside that was just beginning to emerge from the white chaos. Now we have to teach them. And people do not like being taught that they were wrong. Morning came on November 21st with brutal clarity. The sky was hard, bright blue. The sun glinted off endless white. The temperature was still well below 0. Mother opened the door carefully. Snow had drifted against it, but not as badly as I had feared. We could see out across the landscape now. The old cabin 50 yards away was buried to its roofline. The hillside was smoothed over with snow, and in the distance we could see smoke rising from chimneys all across the basin. Thin smoke, desperate smoke, the smoke of people burning their last reserves of wood. Obadiah stood beside me looking out at the transformed world. I need to tell them what I saw here. They are suffering. They are freezing. They need to know there is a better way. They will not believe you. Obadiah's jaw set with determination. Then I will make them believe. I will tell them what I saw, and I will not let them dismiss it. He left just after noon, walking slowly back toward the settlement, carrying the story of our survival with him. Mother and I stood in the doorway and watched him go. It is starting. What is the part where we prove them wrong? The part where everything changes? The visitors started arriving on November 22nd. Abigail Hartley came first alone while her husband Cyrus was out assessing storm damage across the basin. She appeared mid-morning carrying a basket of food as an excuse, though we all knew she had come to verify what Obadiah Crane had told the settlement. Mother welcomed her without a trace of smugness. That impressed me. She could have gloated. She could have made Abigail feel small for doubting us. Instead, she simply invited her inside and offered her tea. Abigail stood in the center of our shelter, turning slowly, taking in every detail. The stone walls, the small fire burning in the firebox, the warm air that filled the space evenly. She pressed her palm flat against the north wall, and I saw her eyes widen. It is warm. Mother explained about ground temperature, about how stone conducted that warmth inward while also holding heat from the fire. Abigail pulled a small thermometer from her coat pocket. She had come prepared to measure, to verify, to gather evidence. I respected that. She hung the thermometer on a peg and we watched it together. 68 degrees. Outside was 14 below zero. We had checked at dawn. Abigail did calculations in her head, her lips moving silently. Then she looked at Mother with something close to anguish. 82-degree difference. How much wood? I spoke up before Mother could answer. I had recorded everything, and I wanted Abigail to hear it from me. 14 logs for 3.5 days during the storm, Mrs. Hartley. We are averaging 4 logs per day now. The old cabin required 10 to 12 logs per day for worse results. Abigail sat down heavily on one of our simple benches. We burned 63 logs during the storm and our cabin was still cold. Cyrus had to stuff every gap with cloth. The children slept in shifts near the fire because the far corners froze solid. She looked at Mother and her voice broke. You tried to tell us. Cyrus tried to warn you against this. And you were right, and he was wrong. How do I tell him that? You do not have to tell him anything. Just bring him here. Let him see. Abigail stayed for 3 hours. She asked questions, technical questions about mortar ratios and wall thickness and thermal mass calculations. Mother answered patiently. I filled in details about the construction process, about the lessons Amos had taught us about grandfather's original designs from Cornwall. When Abigail finally left, she paused at the door. Her eyes were red and her hands shook slightly as she gripped the door frame. I tried to have your children taken from you. I thought I was protecting them, but I was just protecting my own ignorance. I am sorry, Constance. Truly sorry. You acted from care. I cannot fault you for that. Abigail shook her head slowly. Ignorance motivated by care is still ignorance. After she left, I turned to Mother. Why are you not angry at her? Because anger achieves nothing. She has learned. That is what matters. Now she will teach others, and the knowledge spreads. That is how things change. Cyrus Hartley arrived the next day, November 23rd. He came with Abigail, and he brought his own thermometer and a notebook and a measuring tape. He was a carpenter, a man who lived by precision, and he was not going to take anything on faith. Mother and I welcomed them both. Cyrus walked the perimeter of the shelter, measuring wall thickness, examining joints, checking the plumb line that still hung from its peg. He spent 10 minutes studying the firebox, the angle of the stones, the height of the chimney. Then he sat down and did something I did not expect. His voice caught, and I saw his eyes grow wet. My daughter Margaret died in the winter of 1880. She was 5. Pneumonia. The cabin was so cold. I burned wood all night every night, but the corners stayed frozen. She slept in a cold corner. He looked at Mother and the grief on his face was raw and terrible. I built that cabin with my own hands. I thought I was keeping my family safe, but I did not understand what I was doing. I just copied what everyone else built because that was what I knew. And my daughter died because I did not know better. Mother sat beside him and her voice was gentle. You did the best you could with the knowledge you had. But if I had known this, he gestured at the stone walls, she would still be alive. Your son is alive because you knew better. My daughter is dead because I did not. The weight of his grief filled the small space. Even Beatrice, playing quietly in the corner, went still and silent. Mother reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. Then teach others. You cannot bring Margaret back, but you can prevent other children from dying the way she did. You are the best carpenter in Judith Basin. If you build these shelters, people will trust them because they trust you. Cyrus looked up at her with something like desperation. Will you teach me everything your father knew? Yes, and so will Silas. He helped build this. He understands the principles as well as I do. Cyrus turned to look at me. I was small for my age, hands rough from work, but still a child's hands. He studied me for a long moment, then extended his hand across the space between us. Will you teach me? I felt the weight of the moment. A grown man, a respected craftsman asking a boy to teach him. It should have felt strange, but it did not. It felt right. Yes, sir. I will teach you everything I know. Over the next 3 days, Cyrus became our student. He came every morning and stayed until dusk. He took measurements. He sketched diagrams. He asked questions about thermal mass and heat retention and moisture control. Mother taught him the theory. I taught him the practice. We walked through every step of the construction process. How to choose stones, how to mix mortar, how to use a plumb line, how to calculate wall thickness based on climate, how to angle the firebox for maximum efficiency, how to integrate earth berming for insulation. Cyrus absorbed it all like a man who had been lost in the desert and finally found water. On the 3rd day, he asked the question I had been waiting for. Why does no one else know this? Mother thought for a moment before answering. Because knowledge dies unless we write it down and share it. My father learned from old stonemasons in Cornwall who learned from stonemasons before them going back centuries. But when people came to America, they left that knowledge behind. They built with wood because wood was abundant, and over time they forgot there were other ways, better ways, so we have been suffering unnecessarily. Yes, but not out of stupidity, out of forgetting. Cyrus closed his notebook and looked at both of us with new determination. I want to build a stone structure at my property, a workshop. Will you consult? Of course. And I want to document everything, create a manual that others can follow. Will you help with that? Yes. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Cyrus left that afternoon with pages of notes and a sense of purpose I had not seen in him before. He was a man with a mission now, not just to build better structures, but to prevent other fathers from losing daughters to ignorance. On November 27th, Josiah Blackwell came. He came alone on foot rather than horseback, and he stood outside our door for a long time before knocking. I watched him through the window, seeing the struggle on his face, pride warring with curiosity, stubbornness fighting against evidence. Finally he knocked. Mother opened the door. Josiah stood there, hat in his hands, looking older than I remembered. Mrs. Warren, may I come in? Of course. He stepped inside and stopped. Just stopped and stood there, feeling the warmth, seeing the small fire, understanding in an instant that everything he had believed was wrong. His leg was still bandaged from where I had treated the wound during the storm. He leaned on a walking stick Nathaniel had fashioned for him. I owe you an apology. I called you crazy. I said you were building a grave. I told people you were unfit to raise your children. And I was wrong about all of it. Mother waited, saying nothing. Her broken arm was healing in its splint, but she kept it close to her body. I burned 140 logs during that storm. My family huddled around the fire day and night. My wife thought we would freeze. Nathaniel got frostbite on his toes because he gave up his spot near the fire to his younger sister. He gestured around the shelter. And you were comfortable on 14 logs. And when my roof collapsed and I was trapped bleeding, your 10-year-old son came out into that storm and saved my life. He looked at me and I saw shame and respect mixed together in his eyes. You stood up to me before the storm, told me you knew what you were doing. You were brave and you had more wisdom than I did. How can you not hate me? I tried to destroy you, because hate is a waste of energy, and because you are here now willing to learn. That takes its own kind of courage. Josiah was quiet for a long moment. My ranch hands are suffering in the bunkhouse. It is timber poorly built and they freeze every night. I want to build them something better. Will you help me? Yes. Even after everything you did. Especially after everything you did. Because now you understand why this matters. Josiah walked over to where I sat with my notebook. He extended his hand and his grip was firm and honest. You are wiser than most men twice your age, Silas Warren. I am sorry for mocking your mother, and I am sorry for doubting you. I shook his hand, feeling the calluses and the strength of a man who worked hard all his life. I understood then something fundamental about human nature. Being wrong does not make you weak. Refusing to admit it when evidence proves you wrong, that is what makes you weak. I accept your apology, Mr. Blackwell. He smiled, and it transformed his face. Will you teach me how to build like this? Yes, sir. I will. On November 30th, Temperance Winthrop appeared with her entire class. 12 children between the ages of 6 and 14 crowded around our shelter, their breath making clouds in the cold air. I want them to see this. I want them to understand that knowledge matters more than tradition, that evidence should guide decisions, not comfort or habit. The children filled our small space wide-eyed and fascinated. Temperance had them examine the stonework closely, check the thermometer, observe the fire. Then she had me explain the principles. I stood before them teaching children my own age and older, and I told them about thermal mass, about insulation, about working with nature instead of against it, about my grandfather, and the knowledge that traveled across an ocean and through generations to save our lives. They listened with the kind of attention children rarely give adults because I was one of them. And if I could understand this, so could they. One girl about my age raised her hand. How did you know your mother was right and everyone else was wrong? I did not know at first. I was scared she was wrong. But then I looked at the evidence, the numbers, the temperature readings, the amount of wood we used compared to what others used. Evidence does not lie even when it tells you something you do not want to hear. At the end, Temperance addressed the class. What Silas and his mother have shown us is that the right answer is not always the popular answer. Sometimes you have to have courage to do what evidence tells you is correct, even when everyone says you are wrong. Remember this lesson. It will serve you your entire lives. Then she turned to Mother. I wrote a letter to the territorial authorities calling you an unfit mother. I will write another letter today, retracting that statement and praising what you have accomplished. It is the least I can do. Teach your students to think critically, Miss Winthrop. That is all the apology I need. By early December, something remarkable was happening across Judith Basin. Cyrus Hartley had begun construction on a stone workshop. Josiah Blackwell had broken ground on a stone bunkhouse for his ranch hands. 3 homesteader families had started their own projects using our shelter as a template. Amos Fletcher organized weekend workshops where Mother and I taught groups of 20 or more people the basics of stone construction. We demonstrated mortar mixing. We showed them how to use a plumb line. We explained thermal mass calculations using simple mathematics that anyone could understand. I found that I loved teaching. Loved seeing the moment when understanding dawned on someone's face. Loved answering questions and solving problems and helping people see the world differently. Mother noticed one afternoon as I finished explaining heat retention to a group of ranchers. You are good at this. At what? Teaching. Translating knowledge into action. Your grandfather would be proud. I felt a connection to the grandfather I had never met. Through these stones, through this knowledge, through this act of sharing what we had learned, he lived on. During one of the workshops, Edith Grimwood appeared unexpectedly. She walked among the students examining their work. Then she gathered a group around her and produced several stones from her pouch. This one holds heat longest. This one resists cracking and fire. This one insulates best when wet. My grandmothers knew these things before Cornwall existed, before Rome built walls. Knowledge is older than nations. She showed them how to identify good stone by its grain, its weight, its sound when struck. The old ways and the new ways she gestured between herself and Mother are the same ways, just different teachers. After she left, I asked Mother about the connection. Did Grandfather ever meet people like Edith when he was in America? I do not know. He died before I could ask him everything I wanted to ask. But that question stayed with me. How much knowledge had been lost simply because people forgot to write it down? How many lives could have been saved if that knowledge had been preserved? The winter continued, but it had lost its terror. We burned an average of 4 logs per day through December and January. By the end of February, when spring finally began to break winter's hold, we had used 73 logs total for the entire winter. The old cabin would have required 300 or more. We had saved 227 logs. At $2 per log, that was $454 saved, more than Father had earned in 3 months of freight hauling. But more important than the money was what it represented: efficiency, sustainability, the power of knowledge applied correctly. Other families reported similar results. Cyrus Hartley's stone workshop stayed warm with minimal fuel. Josiah Blackwell's bunkhouse became the envy of every ranch in the territory. The 3 homesteader families who had built stone shelters made it through the winter with comfort and security they had never known before. Word spread beyond Judith Basin. A territorial surveyor came in March to document what had happened. He was a compact man in his 40s named William Mercer, who carried himself with the careful precision of someone who built his life on measurements and facts. He interviewed Mother Amos and me. He measured our shelter. He reviewed the data I had meticulously recorded all winter. Then he made us an offer. I want to publish a manual. Stone shelter construction for cold climates. Your designs, your techniques, your data. It will be distributed to homesteaders across Montana Territory. Will you help me create it? Mother looked at me, and I saw something in her expression I had not seen before. Not just pride, but recognition. She was asking my opinion not as a child, but as a partner in this work. What do you think, Silas? Your grandfather's knowledge shared with thousands of people. I thought about all the children who might not die from cold, all the families who might survive winters that would otherwise break them, all the suffering that could be prevented with simple knowledge. The difference between survival and death is often nothing more than information passed from one generation to the next. Yes, we will help. We spent the next month working with William Mercer. Mother provided the theoretical foundation, explaining thermal mass and heat transfer and the physics of why stone worked. Amos contributed his knowledge from Wales, adding details about moisture control and ventilation that complemented what we had built. Cyrus added practical construction details from his carpentry experience translated into stone. And I drew the technical diagrams, careful, precise illustrations showing exactly how to build each component. The manual was published in May of 1884. It was 50 pages long, illustrated with my drawings filled with measurements and ratios and step-by-step instructions. It was distributed free to every homesteader who requested it. Within a year, stone shelters began appearing across Montana Territory. Within 5 years, they were common in Wyoming, Idaho, and the Dakotas. Within 10 years, my grandfather's Cornish designs were keeping families warm from the Canadian border to Colorado. And every single one of those shelters traced back to a widow and her son who had the courage to trust knowledge over tradition. But I am looking ahead. Let me return to the spring of 1884. On March 12th, I turned 11 years old. Mother baked a small cake with the last of our sugar, and Beatrice sang a song she had learned at school. But the real gift came 3 days later when Amos Fletcher arrived with a package wrapped in oilcloth. Your grandfather would want you to have this. You are carrying on his work. You deserve his tools. Inside was a leather tool belt sized for a boy but built to last a lifetime. Attached to it was a brass plumb line polished to a shine. The weight felt right in my hands. I buckled on the belt and felt the plumb line hanging at my side, and I understood. This was not just a gift. This was a responsibility. an acknowledgement that I had become part of a chain of knowledge that stretched back centuries and would, if I did my part, extend forward for generations to come. By May, construction was booming across Judith Basin. 11 stone structures were either completed or under construction. Cyrus Hartley had become the territory's foremost expert on stone building, second only to Mother. Josiah Blackwell's ranch was now a model of efficiency and comfort, and I had become something unexpected. A consultant, a teacher, a young expert sought out by adults who needed guidance. That summer I helped Cyrus build his first complete stone shelter for a client. I was 11. He was 39. But on that construction site, we were equals. Both of us learning. Both of us teaching. Both of us committed to doing the work right. The family who hired us was named Patterson. They had 3 children. The youngest was Helen, just 4 years old, with weak lungs that made every breath a struggle. When we finished their shelter in August, before we left, the father pulled me aside. His name was Robert, and his hands were scarred from years of farming. My youngest has weak lungs. The doctor said she might not survive another winter in our old cabin. But this, he gestured at the stone walls we had built, this will save her life. Thank you, son. I did not know what to say. I was 11 years old, and I had just helped save a child's life with nothing but stone and knowledge and mathematics. On the ride home, Cyrus saw my eyes burning with something I could not name. What is it? Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. We just saved that little girl with rocks and mortar and measurements. That is the most right thing I have ever done. Cyrus smiled, and his voice was warm. Welcome to the calling. Once you understand the power of building well, you cannot go back. You will spend your life creating spaces that keep people safe, and there is no higher purpose than that. He was right. I am 78 years old now, and I have spent my entire life building. I apprenticed with Amos Fletcher until he died in 1893. I built over 100 stone shelters across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. I taught my children who taught their children who taught their children. The knowledge flows forward, growing and adapting, but never forgetting the core principles. But before I reach that ending, let me tell you about one more discovery that tied everything together. In late summer of 1884, Edith Grimwood came to visit one final time. She was preparing to move north to live with her daughter's family, and she wanted to see Mother before she left. She brought with her a package wrapped in deerskin. This belonged to your father. He gave it to my grandmother many years ago before you were born. She kept it safe. Now it should return to his family. Inside was a second journal, smaller than the one we had, but written in Grandfather Matthias Sterling's hand. Mother's breath caught when she opened it. The dates went back further than the first journal. This one started in 1871. Mother read aloud. Arrived in Montana Territory after months of travel. The land here reminds me of Cornwall. Rocky, hard, beautiful. Met with the Shoshone elders today. They showed me their methods of stonework, different from what I learned in Wales, but equally sound. They understand this land in ways I am still learning. I will incorporate their knowledge with what I brought from across the sea. There were pages of notes comparing Cornish techniques with indigenous methods, sketches of how the Shoshone selected stone based on local geology, observations about which stones held heat best in Montana's specific climate. Grandfather had not just brought knowledge from Cornwall. He had combined it with knowledge that already existed here, creating something new and stronger. Mother looked at Edith with tears in her eyes. He learned from your people, and they learned from him. Knowledge belongs to everyone who seeks it. That night, Mother and I sat by the fire reading through the second journal. We found the entry where Grandfather described meeting a young woman named Mary who would become my grandmother. We found his plans for the Colorado shelter. We found his dreams of settling in Montana if gold panning went well enough. We found his death recorded in my grandmother's hand at the end. 1873, pneumonia. He died teaching a neighbor how to build a root cellar. Even at the end, he was sharing what he knew. Mother closed the journal and held it against her chest. Knowledge is the only thing that grows when you give it away. That principle has guided me my entire life. After Amos died, I continued his work. I refined techniques. I experimented with different stone combinations. I taught anyone who wanted to learn. And I wrote everything down, every measurement, every success, every failure. Because I learned from mother and grandfather that knowledge dies in darkness, but lives in light. The shelter mother and I built still stands today. The walls have not shifted 1 inch in 141 years. The roof has been replaced 4 times, but the stones remain warm to the touch even on the coldest winter afternoons. Tourists come to see it now. It is a historical landmark protected by the state. But to me, it is more than a landmark. It is proof that courage and knowledge can change the world. People ask me what the greatest lesson of that winter was. I tell them this. Mother gave me 2 gifts. The first was survival. The second was purpose. Survival came from stone and knowledge. Purpose came from understanding that knowledge dies unless we share it, and that sharing it is not just generous but necessary. Every person who learns extends the chain. Every person who teaches ensures it does not break. I am old now. My hands shake when I try to hold a pencil. My eyes fail when I try to read my old notebooks. My back is bent from 70 years of lifting stones, but when I sit in the shelter mother and I built, I am 10 years old again, learning that the world can be changed by anyone brave enough to question what everyone knows. This shelter is not just a building. It is a lesson in physical form. It stands as proof that one woman and one boy armed with nothing but forgotten knowledge and the courage to apply it can prove an entire community wrong and save countless lives in the process. The frontier laughed at us. The blizzard could not break us. And when winter showed its teeth, we answered not with desperation but with patience. The patience of stone that remembers warmth. The patience of knowledge that outlasts ignorance. The patience of truth that waits silent and certain until the world is ready to listen. Touch these walls if you ever visit Thornfield. The warmth you feel is not just residual heat. It is my grandfather's wisdom traveled across an ocean. It is my mother's courage tested by fire and ice. It is the determination of a boy who learned that being right matters less than being willing to learn. And now it is yours. Build well. Teach others. Remember that the difference between survival and death, between comfort and suffering, between progress and stagnation, is simply this: the courage to trust evidence over habit, and the humility to admit when old ways fail and new ways must be tried. The stone remembers. Make sure you do too.